Hello gamers, Power Word Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about Priest Loot in ZG from the healing perspective. So this is going to be kind of an in-depth guide. We're going to go through all the bosses. We're going to talk about like basically every piece of loot you could possibly use or want as a healer, and we're going to give you my thoughts on them. Now, ZG is an instance. It's like a fantastic healer instance, right? It's a really good catch-up instance in particular. Like if you have a new priest and you're trying to kind of gear them out, ZG will be integral to that. And basically what it allows you to do is to kind of skip over some of your prebis. And for some people that might sound lazy, but realistically it's difficult to get some prebis items nowadays. Just because not many people are running the dungeons, or if they're running the dungeons, they're only doing certain bosses. So ZG is a fantastic supplemental tool, and yeah, we're going to give you the full suite here. We're going to go over everything. So starting with that, we'll just do everything in order. We are going to start with this amulet from the first boss, and this is a pretty strong amulet, to be honest. I think it's very comparable to the amulet from Strat. I would actually prefer this on a priest specifically. I think I would absolutely prefer this over the Dark Moon card neck, and then I would prefer this over the neck from Drek. I would prefer it over the neck from AV. If I had the Choker of Enlightenment, or a Choker of the Fire Lord, or the Veil neck, right, then at that point I would use those over this. But otherwise, this is a fantastic neck if you don't have one, or if you have one of the lesser ones. You can't use this because it's leather, right? So moving to the next available option, Primalist Band. Now this is a 2-set, which is incredibly strong. So we'll look at the other one first, right? And you can see right here, 29 healing. So with the set bonus, this basically equates to 62 healing overall, which means that you average about 31 healing per ring, right? And when you compare that to Cop Band, you're only looking at 44 per ring. So it's only a 13 healing difference, and for a priest that's not really that huge. 26 healing overall, and you're kind of making up for it because you get 6 MP5, right? And not only do you get 6 MP5, but you have 22 intellect, so that's very comparable to the Cop Bands, and you have 8 spirit. So 8 spirit is again about pretty close to 2 additional MP5. So this ring combination on priest is, in my opinion, better than dual Cop Band. That might be a little bit of a controversial take, but I'm willing to make it. I think, in the very least, it's like equivalent. Even if you don't want to say it's better, you'd have to admit that it's like really close. So, unless you have a Pure Elementium band and a Cop Band, I think it's worth looking into these options for rings. It's a little bit more awkward if you already have one of the two of those, right? Because at that point, the rings as a solo ring are not that great. This one is basically the same as the ring from Dire Maul East, and then the other one is basically like a similar or worse version, depending on how you're looking at it, from the In Dreams quest or the ring from LBRS. So at that point, if you already have one of the other really good rings and you're just trying to find one other ring, it's not necessarily worth it to try and put prio on these items. But if you just don't have good rings in general, or you're super interested in using the 2-set, even if you do have one of those good rings, then yeah, you should be taking a look at those. So moving on to the next boss, basically just the Fang here. Now for Priest, you're just going to have Benediction, so you're not going to worry about this. If you have like an absolutely nothing, then this is a pretty damn good dagger, but I would not take this from any other class that needs it, because you're just going to have Benediction, and Benediction is insane. So yeah, don't snag loot like this from other people that need it. Just wait for your Benediction. Going to the next boss, we have a wand here. Now the wand is not a bad wand for the most part. Like, for a while, I was using a 7 intellect wand, right? So this would just be a strict upgrade from that. I eventually transitioned to the wand from Molten Core, because that one has 10 intellect, and this one has a little bit more intellect plus spirit. So this one is at least better than that wand, And some people prefer to have plus healing wands. I prefer to have them to be a bit more stat heavy. So if you want a plus healing wand, this obviously isn't going to be for you. But overall, I think this is a pretty good wand. The problem is, I think a lot of casters are going to want it for Chromagus, right? They're going to for nature vulnerability. So I really wouldn't want to like compete with them for this wand necessarily. Like I'd feel bad rolling against them in most cases, because it's really just going to be a very marginal upgrade for you, and it's going to be very easy to get an alternative. You have the Crimson Shocker from Molten Core, which is very similar. You have the one from Blackwing Lair, which is better, right? Then you can just buy a wand off the auction house, which is almost as good. So yeah, just not super into competing with casters on this. For the flowing robes here, these are just not good for you, right? It's just too easy to get the other alternatives, and yeah, there's just way better options out there than something like this. Now, moving on to the trinket here. This is an interesting one. The trinket is not that great in itself if we're just trying to use it in a slot solo. So if we're trying to do that, we tend to compare it to something like Mind Tap Talisman, right? And at that point, it's just inferior, I believe, if we do the math in terms of like trying to figure out where the MP5 lands on this, right? However, this can be used and then swapped out. So if you're willing to do the trinket management, something like this isn't really that bad, and it's probably worth having on all your healers, right? Because you can just swap it in and then swap it out. Now, it's not quite as simple as that, and that's something that you'll learn as you kind of get more and more of these trinkets in your repertoire and you're trying to swap them, because sometimes combat in this game can be very finicky. You can kind of get stuck using a trinket that's kind of like a dead trinket, like an unused trinket that's already been used, but it's really not that bad in my opinion, and it's worth trying to swap in most cases. The main thing is you don't want to swap really insane static trinkets. So I would pretty much never swap something like a rejuvenation gem if I had it. And if I had a Dark Moon card blue, I might not want to be swapping that all that much, because every time you're swapping it out, you are preventing, a possible proc from occurring. But for some other trinkets that are just more mid, then, of course I would swap them out for something like Meryl's Eye, and then just swap them back, right? So this is going to be highly dependent on, are you willing to do the swapping? What other trinkets do you have? Things like that. But it's definitely not a terrible piece of gear, and it can be worth picking up for sure. Going into Bloodlord here, just Primalist Seal pretty much. This is obviously a caster DPS item, but it's quite, decent for healing if you're really just starting out. I would not take this over a caster, obviously. But if you want to run and this isn't needed by any caster, and you're like a very just fresh priest, don't have any other leg option, this is a solid option. Looking at the cloak here, this is another fantastic option. It's kind of like a little bit better than the cloak from Dire Maul West, but it's not just that it's better, it's more that it's way more accessible. Right, because tons of people are going to be running ZG. You're going to be running ZG for a while to get the shoulder enchant, which we'll talk about later, which means that you're going to have a lot of opportunities to get this cloak, unlike the Dire Maul West cloak, where probably almost nobody is running Dire Maul West right now. Excuse me one moment, I'm just going to open my window here. It is so hot in my room. Okay, so yeah, this is definitely a good option if you either can't afford Heart of the Wild, or you have a completely fresh priest and you just need to get him a cloak. Definitely a good trinket, and it tends to be somewhat uncontested because a lot of healers already do have Heart of the Wild, right? So it's going to be not so bad getting this one. Now, we'll cover the Edge of Madness bosses at the end, right? And this boss is the water boss, doesn't have anything for priest. And, well, actually, I'll give an honorable mention. So this reel here is sometimes used in Nax for warriors, specifically to make sure that there are taunt hits on 4 horsemen. And similarly, you can use this on Priest to give you a really high chance to make sure that your mind control doesn't resist on Vesuvius. So that can be a use case for this, and sometimes people will run the fish boss for that purpose explicitly, but just figured I would mention that. And going into the next set of bosses here, so this is like a better version of the DPS pants for healing, right? Obviously, because they're just pure healing pants, and they're not better than Padres or anything like that by any means, or even either your tier pants. However, if you don't have another option, then these are fantastic. Again, this is what I'm talking about when we're talking about getting a fresh priest in here, right? There's so many items that you can use and benefit from. So pretty good pants, not this, but far from bad. And then we'll go to the next boss. This one basically has nothing for you. There is a staff here with a lot of spirit on it, but we're not super high on spirit, right? It just has so little healing. You're better off with the Alterac Valley offhand and basically any weapon in your main hand, right, if you don't have Benediction. So, yeah, just not a fantastic weapon there. And moving on to Jindu's Hexer. Jindu the Hexer. So there's two items on this boss which are typically looked at in terms of healer. The first is Jindu's Evil Eye, and the next is the Hexer. For Priest, the Hexer doesn't really apply unless you're super fresh, because you have Benediction, and Benediction is amazing. Again, I would not roll against another healer of a different class for this, even if you don't have Benediction, because you should get Benediction in relatively short order, right? Where if they're not getting rank 14, this might be one of the weapons that they're using and stuck with for a while, right? So they'll get way more value out of this than you, and I would defer this to them. Now, going back to the eye here, right? So this is pretty much the BIS neck for all healers, potentially except Priest. And I'll elaborate on that a bit later in the video. But for now, I would be comfortable classifying it as at least equivalent BIS, right? So if you had this, I think it's fine to call it BIS. Nothing much to say about it. It's just really strong, 44 healing, 11 intellect, 6 spirit. It's kind of rare that you get a truly BIS item in a 20-man, but we do in this case, and that's great, right? It's just easier to acquire. Now, if you look at some of the other items here, we have the Hexer cover here. Again, this is something that could be used as a healing item if you don't have a good head equivalent, but it's just not going to be better than a lot of the other things. So, yeah, that's basically Jindu. And going into Hakar, we really don't have any good priest healing loot on Hakar. Something I did want to mention is the Touch of Chaos wand. Now, this is another thing where your caster DPS are going to be looking at this, right? And I believe this is their BIS wand. So you really don't want to be taking this away from them if they don't have it. However, if nobody needs it, it's quite a good wand because it's a shadow damage wand, which means that it's going to benefit from shadow vulnerability if you have an off shadow spec and you're doing something like rune farming or just soloing for any reason. So this can be a very strong wand to use for the actual wanding portion, right? But you're not really going to be using it for PvE healing, because you can just buy a wand off the auction house that has more healing or equivalent healing, and you don't have to compete with casters over it or take it away from them when that's their BIS. So yeah, that's basically most of the normal loot in the instance. I did want to cover one more these bosses actually. So these are the Edge of Madness bosses, and we'll talk about the actual Edge of Madness stuff later, but you'll see this dagger right here. This is basically the equivalent of the venomous weapon over here, right? Or the venomous weapon. Just missing a little bit of stats, right? It doesn't have the intellect or the spirit, but the weapon otherwise seems mostly the same. So this can be decent again if you have like nothing, but again, you're going to be getting Benediction, so don't take this from another healer that can use it. The real thing I wanted to mention was this Thought Blighter weapon. This one is also Shadow, right? So it's going to benefit from the Shadow Weaving, but it doesn't have any spell damage on it, so it's not contested by mages or anything. You can usually get this basically for free. It's also a pretty decent, PvE healing wand to use because 5 mana per 5 is just not that bad, right? It's basically, I would say, equivalent with most of the other options you're going to have at this stage. Obviously, the wand from Blackwing Lair is superior, but that's a raid level wand, so that kind of makes sense. But yeah, I just wanted to point this one out because it's actually relatively... It flies under the radar a lot. And you might think, even if you have something like Crimson Shocker, like, oh, well, basically the same weapon DPS, but it's really not because of the shadow damage aspect, right? So just something to keep in mind there. Now, let's move on to the enchants, and then we will talk about... Well, actually, we'll do the shared loot first. So, shared loot, we have Band of Servitude. This is a great option if, again, you have nothing in that slot and no other cast DPS needs it. That's going to be highly unlikely right now, though. So this is something I would not contest casters with early on, unless obviously you're playing Shadow, but then it's a whole different discussion. So good supplemental ring, but probably going to be hard to get a hold of if you're not being greedy. Moving down, we have the Zul'Gurub headdress. Now this is a fantastic item if you're, again, just starting, right? But it gets basically eclipsed, I would say, by the Priest Tier 2 helm. And the reason is because the Tier 2 helm is basically the same item, but with better stats and slightly less healing. But also, the Priest Tier 2 helm is a fantastic helm to use to enable the Priest 3 set for their Tier 2, right? Which means that it's going to just be messy to use another piece. So if you have that helm, you really don't want to be swapping this one in for it in most cases. That just tends to be how it is, because it's just the Priest Tier 2 helm is just one of the best pieces of Tier 2, so it's one of the pieces that you want to be proccing that set bonus with. Moving on to this cloak, very similar to the band, right? It's not something you're going to want to take from casters who need it, but if you have no other option and the casters don't need it, feel free to grab it until you get something better. The belt here, exact same story. You can basically get a belt that's better than this from DME super easily, so you should never take this from casters. That being said, if nobody needs it, feel free to snatch it, right? It's not the worst item by any means. And then we have the Azulian Scepter here. Now this is a lot more equivalent to the weapon from Venno here. It's just missing a couple MP5 points, and it's basically the exact same thing. So I guess it's missing some spirit, but again, this is just one of those weapons where you're not going to be using it because you have Benediction. So unless nobody needs it, and you need it because you don't have Benny yet, then you could take it. But if anybody else needs a weapon, let them have this. It's just not worth contesting people for stuff like this. It was for something that you're going to replace very, very easily. Now, moving on to the enchants. Okay, so the enchant we have is this one right here. And there's not really that much to say about it. It's just unequivocally better than the enchant that you've been using in basically every way. And it doesn't matter which one you've been using, right? Whether you've been using the +8 healing or whether you've been using the 15 or 150 mana. This just is better than either one of them. You can't really argue with 24 healing in each slot, 5 MP or 4 MP5, and then some additional stamina on top of that. You basically get these from the idols, which one idol comes from Jindu and one idol comes from the Bloodlord here. And when you get the idol, you can then make the enchant. The idols are going to be highly sought after. They always drop from each boss. And basically how it's going to work is that later on, it's going to be harder to get idols, because at that point, people have most of the gear they need from the instance. So that means that they're mostly reserving idols. They're also, at that point, trying to future-proof their gear sets, right? So if something drops from AQ40 that is better than what they have, they want to be able to instantly put the enchant on it, right? So that's basically how that works. and that's why it's a lot harder to get idols later on than it is early. So if you don't need much actual gear from ZG, it's definitely worth investing heavily into the idols early, get those out of the way, maybe even get a couple extra for items you want to put them on in the future. So that's the idols. The other enchant is the shoulder enchant. Now this is very simple. You get the same one for all the healers, and it's basically just going to be 33 healing to shoulder, just a strict upgrade. Nothing really much to say about that other than the fact that it takes Exalted to get, and you basically want to do that because it's very good. So we are now going to talk about the Edge of Madness trinket for Priest. I think this trinket is slightly overrated, but I only say that because it's not like necessary to have by any means, but it is very strong. I mostly consider it a parsing trinket because it just allows you to basically turn your greater heal into a flash heal, which can be very useful, particularly when you're trying to parse, right? Because there's no like opportunity cost to doing it or anything like that. Your 1.5 second heal at that point or close to it is just going to heal more than somebody who is just using a normal flash heal, because you can use up to greater heal rank 4 and still have the same cast speed as that flash heal while this thing is active. So that's very powerful. The reason why I say it's more of a parsing trinket than like this trinket's going to save your raid is because it's obviously just very difficult to know when you would need to use this, right? Like most of the time you're just cycling trinkets. So you're putting this in, you're using it on cooldown, you're cycling out for a passive trinket or another active trinket, which means that the odds that you're going to actually have this proc up when you really need it to cast that, that really quick greater heal, it's probably not going to happen. Now you could obviously just kind of main this trinket and then wait for a situation like that to occur. But the problem there is you're now hemorrhaging value on other trinkets you could have been using instead, and then you're hemorrhaging value even on the trinket itself because you're not using it on cooldown. But more than that, it's like, are you really going to, like if a tank gets chunked to like 30%, is your first instinct really going to be to pop this trinket and then cast a greater heal? You're probably just going to automatically flash heal him, right? Or automatically shield him. And both those responses are, pretty good and reasonable. So I really view this trinket more as something where a big damage phase of a fight is kind of coming out. Like, for example, Broodlord, right? You know that he's going to have a blast wave happen soon because he hasn't had one. So you have your kind of trigger finger on this. You have it equipped for the fight, and you're ready to use it immediately as soon as that blast wave goes out, and you're now just putting back that HP a lot more aggressively because you're able to use greater heal instead of flash heal. So that's kind of how I view this trinket, as something like that. But don't let me try and undersell it, because it is one of the best things you can have, right? There's no really equivalent to it. It's pretty unique in what it does. And there's never any harm in having an additional on-use trinket to cycle in and out of a rotation. So very strong, and while it's on, most of the time, you can get the 2-set here because you can easily use the 2-set from ZG with the ZG shoulders, because the ZG shoulders are actually quite strong. They're basically equivalent to tier 2 shoulders. And we will look at those right now. So you can see right here, if you were to compare these to the ZG shoulders, you would notice no difference at all. The Blackwing Layer tier 2 shoulders, you would basically notice no difference at all. So the only reason you would ever really use the tier 2 shoulders over this would be if the tier 2 shoulders are using or are providing you with the bonus, right, for the 3-piece tier 2, because otherwise you're pretty much always better off having these equipped, because when you do sub in the trinket, if you're using the trinket at least, you're getting this 2-set automatically. And people are going to ask questions about the 2-set in general, right? Is it worth using? Should we pursue this? And the answer is it's kind of a bit complicated if we want to be exact, but we don't really need to be super exact, right? So I'll give you some general principles. Typically, if you're new, right, and you don't have much gear at all, then yes, the 2 sets are very effective because we can look at some of the other pieces and they're really not bad. This belt is like not a bad belt. And especially if you don't have the one from DM East, then it's quite a good belt. The bracers are going to be even more impactful, I would say. And if you're a new healer, you're probably going to be using the DM East belt, and you're going to be using the bracers from ZG combined with the shoulders from ZG. Because the bracers are quite good by themselves, and you're not going to have the Vamp Braces of Prophecy as a new healer unless you buy them, but they can be kind of pricey even still at this point in the game because they're very good, right? So this is a very, easy 2 set to make use of if you're very new. Now, if you have a lot of gear already, right, it's going to be a little bit harder to work 2 set in, but there are ways you can do it. So I have a setup here where we actually use the neck from ZG, the class neck. And you can't see that right now because for some reason the class neck is not displayed in ZG, but it has 8 intellect, 13 spirit, 8 stamina, and then it has 18 plus healing. But it also has increased the amount of damage absorbed by Power Word Shield by 35. Now, that's a very interesting bonus, and this is something I kind of overlooked back in 2019, but I'm going to be using this neck as my primary neck for a while at least in this version of the game. And why is that? Well, because when you really think about it, what's going on here is you're getting a lot of value for your shield, and I'm somebody who tends to lean into a lot of shield usage. Now, why are we getting so much value? Well, because in order to get 35 extra absorb on your shield, normally you would have to invest 350 points of healing. Because remember, the coefficient on shield is 10%. It's 10 to 1, right? So for every point, you need 10 points of healing to get 1 point of healing on the shield, which means you would need 350 points of healing to get 35 additional points of healing on your Power Word Shield. So this is giving insane value in that sense, but also when you combine it with the shoulders, you basically cover up any sort of weakness in your gearing, right? Because if you were to replace the neck with, let's say, because you're going to use the shoulders anyway, right? There's no reason to not use the shoulders. And then if you were to replace your neck with the Eye of Jindu, okay, you would gain about like 26 healing. And the set bonus is 22 healing. So, you're basically not losing anything there, and you're gaining the Power Word Shield effect, which is absolutely huge. Now, the one caveat here is when you swap in the trinket, right, you are now going to have 3 set, and the 3 set is not really that great, right? As you can see, because it's for Smite and Holy Fire, which means that you don't have to really worry about not having the 2 set when your trinket's equipped, because you're always going to have 2 set due to your shoulders. So in that regard, when the trinket is actually active, you're not really gaining as much benefit from the neck as you otherwise would be. But when the trinket's not active and you have something else swapped in, you are now gaining the set bonus where you otherwise wouldn't. So I think that's quite important. And how I would set things up, just to kind of give you guys a preview, is in that setup where I have the neck and the shoulders, I have the Halo of Transcendence for the helm. I have the All-Seeing Eye of Zul'Gurub, which is the ZG neck for the neck. I have the Zandalar Confessor's Mantle, which is the ZG shoulders. Then I have the Robes of Transcendence for the chest. I have the Van Braces of Prophecy for the bracers. I have the Gloves of Prophecy for the gloves. Then I have the Girdle of Prophecy for the belt. Leggings of Transcendence for the pants. And then the Boots of Pure Thought for the boots. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to make use of Boots of Pure Thought, which is going to be your strongest kind of like Bis individual item from Blackwing Lair, right? Then it allows you to still have your 3-piece because you have Leggings of Transcendence, you have Halo of Transcendence, and you have Robes of Transcendence. Then on top of that, it allows you to maintain your 3-piece tier 1, which is done with Gloves of Prophecy, Girdle of Prophecy, and Van Braces of Prophecy. And you're still getting your ZG2 set from the neck plus the shoulders. And that basically covers all your main slots. So that's how I would personally run like a Bis setup. Now, obviously, if you don't have Boots of Pure Thought, you have a lot more flexibility here, right? Because you can kind of swap out and choose which pieces of tier 2 you want, because you can use the tier 2 boots in place of Boots of Pure Thought, and the tier 2 boots are basically the next best option outside of Boots of Pure Thought. So they're very good. It's just Boots of Pure Thought are obviously amazing. So if you don't have Boots of Pure Thought, then you have a lot more flexibility with how you set this up. And you can even forego using, using either option in that slot. Like what you could do is you could use the tier 2 boots in that slot and then drop something else. Like you could drop the Van Braces of Prophecy, right, to get 2 set with the ZG shoulders, and then you would maybe use the Prophecy boots to still maintain your 3-piece tier 1 if you didn't have Boots of Pure Thought. So you can do things like that as well. But I think the optimal thing to do is just try and get Boots of Pure Thought and then use the setup that I just recommended there. And that's, I think, one of the strongest setups you can have. So, yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. And if you have any other questions or anything like that, feel free to ask them in the comments. I'll do my best to reply. If this helped you, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps me a lot. And I will see you guys next time. Thank you for watching.